Well, today we are in our book, and here's the book, and we're in a lesson entitled Saves in Ezekiel chapter 11. But I'm going to just close the book up and lay it aside because I like just studying the chapter a little better, because I think the information that's in the book today is so-so. So we're going to just talk a little bit about Ezekiel 11. Let me tell you a little bit about Ezekiel. He's 30 years old. He's living in Babylon. Now, so he's gone off into the captivity already. He was a priest, and priests normally begin their work in their 30th year. He served during the same time as Jeremiah and Daniel. And, of course, Daniel, there's a book of Daniel in the Bible. There's a book of Jeremiah in the Bible as well. So there's a lot of writings from this time. The book begins with Ezekiel by the Chebar River in Babylon. Before his captivity, he grew up during the reign of the good king Josiah. From about 640 to 690 BC was when Josiah was in place. If you know anything about the kings, you know Josiah was one of the best of all time. And instead of doing his priestly duties at 30, he becomes a prophet of God, because he's not where the temple is anymore. He was married. He was married at age 23, and we know that from the scripture. And it was around the year 600 BC that he was married. He went into Babylon into captivity in the year 597. So Judah was attacked, and captives were taken away in 3 waves at 3 different times. Daniel and the other captives were taken in the first wave in 605 BC. Then again, in 597 BC, the Babylonians came and they took treasure from God's temple, and more captives, including Ezekiel, were taken to Babylon in 597. Then again, in 587 BC, Jerusalem falls, and almost all the residents are taken as captives. And this is the final group of captives who were taken from Jerusalem into Babylon. Ezekiel began as a prophet when Judah was still a nation, but under Babylonian control. And at that time, there were a lot of false prophets. A little side note here, Ezekiel lost his wife at age 37, and that is at his age 37. That's detailed in Ezekiel 24:18. A little bit more here about the river Chebar or Chebar. It was a channel that flowed southeast from the city of Babylon. God gave Ezekiel a vision there, and a whirlwind came out of the north, and a cloud with fire was inside, and it was very bright, and it was sort of amber bluish in color. A detailed description is given of something that seems like a throne with wheels and living creatures that moved according to the wishes of the Spirit of God on the throne. The noise was like many waters and like the Almighty. Now, man, this is an amazing description of a whirlwind, like a big tornado, and there's fire in it, and he sees the throne of God. And there's a lot of details about what the throne looks like in Ezekiel, and it's pretty amazing, and I'll show you some pictures here. Of course, these are not actual photos. These are just ideas based on the description. The Spirit entered into Ezekiel and set him up on his feet, and the Lord told him to go to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation, and prophesy to them. But he also said, they're not going to listen to you. So he had a mission that was going to fail, but he had to carry it out anyway because it was according to God's instructions. He is not to be afraid of them nor their words, and he is to speak God's words to them. A scroll was given to Ezekiel, and on it was written within and without, and it included lamentations, mourning, and woe. The Lord prepared Ezekiel for the difficult task that he has given to him. Ezekiel would be as hard and as stubborn as the people he would speak to. God changed him so that he would be, no matter how they treated him and no matter how hard-headed and hard-hearted they were, he was going to be just as hard-hearted and just as hard-headed. The Lord said he would make Ezekiel's face and forehead as hard as their forehead, as hard as a diamond and harder than flint. He was not to be afraid or discouraged because they would still be rebellious. God wanted Ezekiel to listen very carefully to his words, and Ezekiel was to take them to heart. He was to tell them what God says, whether they would listen or whether they would refuse. So the Spirit lifted up Ezekiel, and Ezekiel gave a description of it. He said he described a loud rumbling sound behind him. Ezekiel was overcome at the glory of the Lord, at this vision that he saw. The sound of the wings and the wheels was like loud rumbling. And Ezekiel was lifted up and taken away. And he was taken over to Jerusalem. And here's what God told him to do. I'm going to entitle this section, Ezekiel's Unusual Portrayals Instructed by God. So he's going to do a little drama or a little bit of a reenactment of some things that it's kind of strange. But if you saw this, it would get your attention. He was to build a model of Jerusalem and depict a siege against it. So he's going to build a model. And somehow he's going to depict how the Babylonians are going to come and lay siege to Jerusalem. Also, he was to lie on his left side for 390 days according to the years of their iniquity. During this time, he would make bread baked over a fire and using dung for fuel to cook with. So this is, he's going to eat food cooked in a gross manner. He was also to lie on his right side for 40 days during a year's time period as a symbol of bearing their iniquity. He was to shave his hair off and weigh it. He was to burn a third of it, smite a third of it with a knife. In other words, hit it, I guess, and cut it up. And scatter a third of it to the wind. A small part of the hair that was on his clothing would be gathered up and cast into the fire. This is symbolic of what would happen to Jerusalem because of their wickedness. God would send famine, evil beasts, pestilence, blood, and the sword upon them, and the Lord would not pity them because of the behavior that they had exhibited in their idolatry. And we'll talk about later here all the things that they did. So in this vision, the Lord carried Ezekiel to the temple in Jerusalem. Ezekiel was in his house, and the elders of Judah sat before him. Now this is the preparation. This is the beginning of the vision. Ezekiel is there at his home in Babylon, and apparently some of the elders of Judah were there with him, and the hand of the Lord fell upon him. And he saw sinful activities in the temple of the Lord. Worship of images of creeping things, beasts, idols were all going on there. He found 70 elders, in other words, the older men, the leaders. They were worshiping with a cloud of incense and they were worshiping abominable things in the temple. He saw women worshiping and weeping for a foreign idol. Also, 25 men in the inner court of the temple were facing the east and worshiping the sun with their back toward the temple. As part of this vision, God gathered men who were in charge of the city. Now, these seem like angelic beings to me, not just men, but they seem like maybe like the angel Michael, who is the prince of the people of Israel. I'm saying like that, but it just said these were men in charge of the city that God gathered up. The men came with slaughter weapons in their hands, some kind of swords or some of these, some kind of weapon where they could cut people up. And they came with the slaughter weapons in their hands, and they were clothed in linen, and they had inkhorns by their sides. In other words, they had these containers like horns that they had ink in them. He commanded them to go through the city and mark the foreheads of those who mourn for the sins of the city. So there's going to be a few people who understand what's going on. They understand that because of their sin and because of their rebellion against God, because of their idolatry, because of their bloodshed, because of the way they treated others, that they needed to mourn for those sins, and they did so. And so these men were going to go through the city and mark those people on the forehead, so that this was kind of like the Passover, if you remember the Passover, and they had blood over the doorpost. Well, here, these are going to be people who get some ink on their forehead. Who knows, maybe it's red ink signifying blood, but it doesn't say that. He commanded them to kill without mercy all the others. And he goes into detail about it. It doesn't matter if they're young, it doesn't matter if they're old, if they're children or adults. Kill them all without mercy. And the men came back and reported that all was done. And understand that this is a vision. Then the glory of the Lord departed from the temple. Now we're actually going to talk about today's lesson in Ezekiel 11. The vision continues. The Spirit lifted up Ezekiel and brought him to the eastern gate of the Lord's house. A couple of years ago, I was in Jerusalem, and I was on the Mount of Olives, and I was looking down on the eastern gate, the current eastern gate, which was blocked off. The other gates are open, but this gate is blocked off. And part of what's going to happen today here with God's Spirit leaving, he comes out at that gate and goes up the Mount of Olives. So it's interesting that where we were was a place where God's throne was at one time, briefly. There he saw 25 men that the Lord said devised mischief and gave wicked counsel. They prophesied positive things to the people that actually would never happen. The Lord told Ezekiel to prophesy against them. You have multiplied your sins and filled the streets with those who have been killed. So there's a lot of violence going on during this time. You have feared the sword, and the Lord will bring the sword upon you. You will be brought out and delivered into the hands of strangers, and they will execute judgments upon you. You will die by the sword. Now remember, this is Ezekiel giving a prophecy of what's going to happen to the people of Jerusalem. You will be brought out of Jerusalem to the outer borders of the country. Now they thought they were going to be within the walls of Jerusalem and they would be protected when the enemy came. But God is saying, no, I'm going to pull you out of the city and take you all the way to the outer borders of the country. Jerusalem's not going to offer you any protection whatever. The walls of Jerusalem are not going to help you. You will know that I am the Lord. And one of the men fell dead, and Ezekiel fell upon his face and cried to the Lord and asked the Lord if he would destroy them all. even the remnant of Israel. So this vision is very upsetting to Ezekiel. The Lord told Ezekiel that those who were allowed to stay in Jerusalem thought that they were special because they were not taken away. Now remember, Ezekiel was taken away, but there were still people in Jerusalem. And God's just telling him, listen, this is what they're thinking. They think there's something special, that they didn't get taken. But the Lord said he would be a little sanctuary to those who were taken away. In other words, he was just telling Ezekiel that for you guys who are in the captivity, I'm still going to be there with you, and I'm going to provide some sanctuary for you. The Lord said he would bring them back to their land in Israel from the countries where they were exiled. They will return and remove the detestable things and the abominations. So he tells Ezekiel to prophesy against them. He tells them all the bad things that are going to happen. But after a period of time, he tells them he's going to bring them back to Israel. He will bring them back and give them one heart and a new spirit, and will remove their stony heart and give them heart of flesh. They will walk in his statutes and keep his ordinances. They will be his people, and he will be their God. Now this is a unique part of this vision. Then the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stopped upon the mountain on the east side of the city. So this vision that old Ezekiel saw, that maybe you're going to see on these pictures that I'm going to put in this presentation, of this glorious vision of God's throne with these beings and these wheels within wheels and these cherubim and these with four faces, and the wheels within wheels that have eyes, and the very bright nature of God sitting on his throne. And so because of the evil that was going on in the temple, he had been living with the people of Israel, and his presence and his spirit was there. But now he was essentially leaving them and going away. The Spirit took Ezekiel back to Chaldea, which is another word for Babylon, to the people of the captivity. Then Ezekiel spoke to the people of the captivity about all the things that the Lord had shown him in the vision. Now here's a summary of what has gone on in Ezekiel 11. The summary is different than the summary that you'll see in your book. Israel had abandoned the Lord. They had done great wickedness. They had been involved in all kinds of bloodshed, all kinds of adultery, all kinds of idolatry. And they were disobedient to the Lord. They didn't take care of poor people. And they had broken the covenant that God had made with them. And God's justice requires that when they broke the covenant, that they be punished. Ezekiel was named a prophet and a watchman for his people. He was to go to them and warn them, even though God was clear they're not going to listen, but they were given the opportunity. He prophesied to them about their destruction and captivity because of their sin. And he prophesied to them that a remnant would remain, and they would one day return to Israel with a new start and a new spirit. And we know that happened. Thank you.